Hey, what's up everyone, and welcome to the NeddyNoodles show. For this episode, I'll give you a brief background of the person behind this voice through the help of some questions that were sent in via LinkedIn, Facebook, and Instagram. Let's see if we have something in common, shall we? Over the last 2 months, I have encouraged my friends and followers to ask me as many questions as possible in regards to my nursing background and career. I would then use these answers as a way of introducing myself to my listeners. So without further ado, let's get right into it. The first question was a direct message on my Instagram account, and it goes, "How did you become a nurse and why theater nursing?" So for the people who don't know, nursing was a trending and popular profession in the Philippines in the early 2000s. It was a way for everyone to go out of the country and earn lots of money overseas. But at the time I had little knowledge and interest in going to Australia, as Australia was actually my plan C behind the US and the UK. I fell in love with theater nursing because I realized in nursing school that I had photographic memory. And having that skill was very helpful in exams, especially in anatomy. It was a very handy skill to have if you were thinking or planning to work in theaters, considering you are able to remember the instruments' names, the trays, and so on and so forth. And the rest was history. The next question goes, how many years have you worked as a nurse, and how is it like transitioning from an overseas nurse coming into Australia? I've been a nurse for 16 years, the same age as my daughter. It's crazy, I know. I have spent 5 years in the Philippines, and this year is actually my 11th year in Australia. One of the things that made my transition difficult was actually the language barrier. My English was very limited, and I was actually saving it for the yes and no questions. This is because I wasn't prepared for the Australian accent, slang, and humor, which caught me off guard. Again, because I didn't prepare to be coming to Australia, instead I was planning to be in the US. So there was kind of a delay in my response in every conversation, as I had to process everything in my head before I could formulate an appropriate reply. To be specific, whenever someone speaks to me and asks a question, I had to translate the message into American English first for me to understand what was being said, and then formulate a response in my head before I can respond accordingly. Or another example is whenever someone would crack a joke at work, I was always the last person to react and laugh, which was embarrassing. Again, I was trained using the American terminologies. Also, being a novice nurse at the time, I've never seen laparoscopic or joint replacement surgeries. So I had to learn all of these things from scratch, and the surgical turnover of these cases were 4 to 5 times quicker than what I'm used to. Lastly, Australia being a multicultural and diverse country, people have different accents. And the most difficult accent for me to understand were Scottish and Irish accents, which just did my head in, and I couldn't really understand what the people were saying. There was actually a time when a colleague of mine asked me for a jug. A jug, he said, and it took me a while to realize that he was just asking for a pitcher or a flask. So again, the differences between your American English and your British English. Alright, moving on, this next question was sent in by Instagram and is about education and training. Did you get much support and training when you first started in Australia? My honest and direct answer to that one is no, because I feel like there was not much support as I needed. It actually would have been an easier transition for me had I received better support and training, because not everyone is a fast learner, including myself, but I felt like at the time the educators would just give you handouts and they expected you to be good in the shortest time as possible, which is not realistic for most people. In my case, I had to ask for extra shifts to scout in cases just to learn the sequence of the surgery before I would feel competent enough to scrub in. And due to the lack of support, I actually picked up a few agency shifts to fast-track my education process. To give you a brief idea on how I did this, I would do an agency shift from 6:30 to 12:30, for example, and then would still show up to my other job from 1 to 9 on the same day. So I did this for 2 years straight, And it actually felt like I fast-tracked my learning, and so I became more confident and proficient in what I do. So we have here the next question that was sent in anonymously. How many hospitals have you worked at, and which one is your favorite, if you have any? So in total, I've worked at 9 different hospitals. 2 of them were in the Philippines, and in Australia, I had worked in 7 different hospitals. 5 of them were in South Australia, mainly in Adelaide, and I'm currently in 2 different hospitals here in the sunny coast. So my first job was actually in Adelaide, which is where I stayed the longest for about 7.5 years. And my shortest stay in a workplace was within 6 months. Being in Adelaide for more than a decade, I think it is safe to say I've made a name for myself, and I hope it's in a good way. I'd like to think of myself as a team player and a hardworking employee, never lazy, always helpful, always trying my best to perform at the highest level. And I wish my managers can back me up here and confirm this on air for me. So if you guys are listening, please comment down below to reassure our listeners. That'd be really helpful. Thank you. And I've got a follow-up question which is related to that previous one. And it goes, isn't it a red flag for employers that I have moved from hospital to hospital in a short period of time? So my move was actually a personal decision, and I was seeking career progression at the time. So when I left, I was a clinical nurse that became an ANUM, an Associate Nurse Unit Manager, which is a slightly higher role than a CN. Then I started to get exposed and was able to scrub for bigger and complex cases like your APR, liver resection, 3-stage esophagectomies. And I think every hospital has their own specializations and identity, each have their strengths. Let's say, for example, if you mention the Memorial Hospital, people will almost instantly think ENT surgeries for pediatrics. And if you say sports med, it's orthopedics. And lastly, if you mention Calvary North Adelaide, people would know it's for obstetrics and gynecology. So I wouldn't be able to scrub for multiple cases or specialties if I didn't go around hospitals and learn from each one of them. Because each hospital I worked at, I have earned and learned at the same time, if that makes sense. In every role, I have learned a new specialty and became good at it, and that makes my move a highlight rather than a red flag, in my opinion. And to answer the question, which one is my favorite workplace, without offending each and every hospital that had contributed to my career progression, my favorite workplace would be the last one in South Australia before I left the state. Due to the fact that they had more male nurses compared to the other hospitals I've worked at, which is very rare. It was very important to me to have a solid male support group at work because I've never had it on my first few years, which I think is very good for your mental health, which is a topic that we will discuss in the next few episodes. Because I think not many people value or take into consideration these kinds of things when they're looking for a job. But for me, I actually researched and asked around about it, which made it easier to accept their job offer. Because I can work anywhere, but I don't want to work just somewhere. And for today's final question that was sent in via LinkedIn, what specialty do you scrub for and do you think you're good at it? Wow, okay. So I'd like to classify myself as a jack of all trades, and I know there's a misconception about this line or phrase, jack of all trades, master of none, versus jack of all trades and a master of one. So I think this speaks of the skill mix in the workplace. Again, another topic for another episode. But I think it talks about how important it is to have a few specializations under your belt to help the workplace manage workload and eventually avoid burnouts. Without sounding too much of myself, I can do pretty much whatever is needed of me except cardiac surgeries because I'm not trained for those cases and will probably ask for a proper training before I can actually scrub for one. But to answer the question, which one is my favorite specialty, I've actually had a few favorites throughout my career, which started from doing eye surgeries, your cataract and pterygium, to your oromax jaw surgeries, to your general colorectal bariatric liver resections, to your major ENT cochlear implants and transsphenoidal surgeries, which actually got me an invite to join the neuro team. But my current favorite is actually spine surgeries. And I've been lucky enough to work with some of the best orthospine and neurospine surgeons in the country. And if you don't believe me, you can certainly check them out on my LinkedIn profile, as there's heaps of them. And I think we've come to the end of the show, and that's it for today's episode. I hope I've given you a brief background on who I am behind the voice and a glimpse of my nursing career. So that's enough about me, and let's talk more about you next time. If you have any questions or you would like to be a guest in the show to share your experience and knowledge about theater nursing, we can certainly make it happen. Feel free to message me on my Instagram and YouTube page. And thank you again for listening. Until then, I'll see you next time. This is your host, NeddyNoodles. And don't forget, don't touch anything blue.